My name is Catherine, and I'm 52 years old. I didn't see his hand coming. One second, I was placing a plate of pot roast on the table. The next, the left side of my face exploded in stars. The fork clattered to the tile. Gravy slid across the edge like a slow brown tide. He stared at me, my husband, like my breath offended him, and said, "If you can't even serve it hot, what are you good for?" I tasted copper. I felt my heartbeat in my cheek. I said nothing. I have learned that silence for men like Michael is light fluid. He will pour it until the house goes up. So I stood there with the sting and the ringing, and I watched him chew the first bite in a way that made me think of a wolf swallowing feathers. Here is the stomach drop truth. That slap wasn't the first bad thing. It was just the first bad thing that didn't bother to dress up as an accident. What I did next wasn't what he expected. Quick one. Since you're here with me, tell me where you're watching from. Which city? Drop it in the comments. Then come right back, because this is where the story turns. I was the woman who deferred and apologized and made lists on pastel sticky notes. I made room for everyone's elbows at the table. When our children were little and fevers ran like earthquakes at 2 a.m., I was the night shift. When his mother's knees failed, I gave her my Saturdays. When jobs vanished in the 2008 collapse, I made bread and canceled cable and learned to cut hair in the kitchen with a cape made from a trash bag. And when his dream of starting a home renovation business needed a co-signer, I sold the inheritance my father left me, a little cottage upstate that smelled like pine and old coffee, and signed. The business trucks wore his name, the debt wore mine. The slap made a sound like a door closing, but the fear afterwards sounded more like paper, the rustle of old bills, the crinkle of unpaid notices, the thin whisper of a marriage promise that had thinned to a thread. It wasn't about the food. It was never about the food. That's what I told myself when I pressed a frozen bag of peas to my cheek and stared at the floor until the speckled tile turned into a little map. I traced a way out with my eyes. I could see two paths: leave and lose everything, or stay and lose myself. What I could lose had form and weight. There was the house, a careful house, bought in a good zip code because I made us look twice and stretch once. There were the retirement accounts I'd babysat like a nervous hen. There was my relationship with our grown kids, Brianna and Luke, who still thought their father's temper was simply passion. There was the church gossip, the neighbors with their soft lawn shoes, the way people look at you like you forgot to hide your bruises inside a polite smile. After the slap, I started watching. It's funny how your senses sharpen when the truth finally taps you on the shoulder. I began to notice what didn't fit. The plainest things were the loudest. A new gym bag that didn't smell like sweat. An extra receipt folded twice and tucked behind his wallet from a boutique hotel downtown with corporate rate scribbled by hand. The thermostat app told on him. A 1:13 a.m. spike in temperature because someone came home to a cold house, then turned it up, then back down. There was also the silence where sound should be. Our doorbell camera went out for a week. The shared cloud album lost the last month's uploads. His phone, once careless on the counter, began to live in his pocket, face down like a small, disobedient animal. I didn't confront him. That is the first lesson I learned in the quiet after the slap. Never argue empty-handed. Rage burns fast, proof burns forever. So I gathered proof. I opened a new email from a public library computer. I ordered a tiny voice recorder that looks like a car key. I took photos, and then I took photos of the photos and texted them to the new email. Because men like Michael are not clever, but they are thorough when it comes to destruction. And I started talking, quietly. I called a hotline. I called a lawyer my friend Hannah recommended. She's a velvet glove over a blowtorch, Hannah said, and that's exactly what I needed. I didn't tell Hannah about the slap. I told her I tripped on the rug, and her mouth made a shape like pity, and she changed the subject in the way women do when they know and want to let you keep your dignity. Michael became nicer in public. He bought flowers, which he never does. He put his hand on the small of my back at church and laughed loudly at the pastor's jokes. He started insisting on date nights. No phones, just us. But he always chose the restaurant, and it was always somewhere with a parking garage and cameras at the entrances. I didn't care about the lipstick on the paper napkin I found in his car door pocket. I didn't care about the unexplained cash withdrawals or the second toothbrush tucked into the lining of his leather overnight bag. Those were puzzle pieces that spelled infidelity, and women have been given that puzzle since the beginning of time. What I cared was the new statement from a credit union I had never heard of, addressed to me at our house with an account number I didn't recognize and a balance that made my stomach drop into my shoes. $0. The account had been opened 2 months ago with my name and social and then emptied in a single cashier's check made payable to a Shell LLC with a name that sounded like a landscaping company. I put my hands flat on the table. The peas on my cheek had melted. I was all heat now. It was not just that he was cheating. It was that he was building an exit ramp out of my bones. The next clue came from the most unexpected place, our neighbor's dog.
I was carrying in groceries when Daisy, the golden retriever that lives 2 doors down, trotted up our driveway with something in her mouth. She wiggled like she'd brought me a slice of the moon. It was a folded paper, just a corner, damp with dog spit. The wind had blown the rest into the shrub under our bedroom window. I crouched and lifted the branches and found a half-shredded envelope from a law office across town. Inside, a draft petition for a restraining order. The petitioner was Michael. The respondent was me. I read the allegations with my mouth open, my face numb. He wrote that I threatened him with a kitchen knife. I had been chopping parsley. He wrote that I threw a heavy object at him. The heavy object was a bag of flour dropped by my clumsy hands. He wrote that I drank, that I screamed, that I was unstable, that I sabotaged his business, that I scratched his truck. The petition was not yet filed. It was dated for the following week. He had collected evidence, too. Photos of a knife on a cutting board, a dent in the garage drywall, a broken taillight. I felt the air go thin. This was not a messy affair anymore. This was a premeditated demolition. I needed more than photos. I needed time and leverage and something he couldn't explain away with a red face and a steady voice. So I started a journal with details he couldn't control. Copies of our thermostat history, screenshots of timestamps, a list of every ATM withdrawal and where the cameras would be. I printed the draft petition and put it in a folder labeled Recipes, Winter. I bought Daisy a bone the size of a canoe. The voice recorder arrived. It was matte black and small enough to sit under the lip of the kitchen island. That night, during his new, generous date night, he performed tenderness. Hand on mine, a flurry of texts he pretended not to read, a toast to us. He didn't know he was also performing for a tiny witness under the marble, one that didn't care about charm. When we came home, he announced he was going to shower, which is what he does when he needs 15 minutes to turn into someone else. I slipped into his office and opened the second drawer where he keeps warranties and past due notices. There, Under a pamphlet from a roofing supplier was a sheet of paper with a list of names and numbers. At the top, Vargas, Wednesday, 3 p.m. I didn't know any Vargas. My lawyer did. The next morning, I called the lawyer. "Vargas?" I asked. Silence. Then the up-tempo voice she uses when she's about to say something heavy. "Judge Vargas. Family court." He had a judge. "Don't panic," she said, calm as a morning lake. "If he's shopping judges socially, that's a bad look. Keep walking, Catherine. We will need everything. Save your breath and collect your facts." I had facts now, and I had a fire that had finally learned how to stand. That week, the investigation became my second job. I traced the Shell LLC to a P.O. box at a mailbox store. I sat in my car with a baseball cap pulled low and watched a man in a safety vest collect the day's mail and hand it to a woman in a pencil skirt who scanned the envelopes and placed them into 2 neat stacks. The woman turned, and I caught a profile that made the back of my neck prickle. It was Alana, my friend Hannah's Pilates instructor, the one who taught restorative core for busy professionals, which is a very gentle way of saying learn to hold your stomach in while lying. Alana had once told me, while adjusting my hips, that no relationship survives without recalibration. I recorded the license plate. I wrote down the time. I went home and labeled a new folder, Core. Michael came home whistling that night. He put his keys in the bowl like a man in a commercial for happiness. He asked too sweetly, "How's my girl?" The recorder under the island caught every note. I answered evenly, "Fine." He tilted his head and searched my face like a locksmith deciding on a tool. Then he smiled. "You should nap more," he said gently. "You've seemed so frazzled." I thought about the draft petition and the word unstable. I breathed in the way my therapist taught me, box breaths, corners of calm, and I set the table. I made sure the food was hot. It did not matter. He complained that the rice was gummy. He slammed the oven door. He wanted me off balance. He was building a case, and I was supposed to be his best evidence. 2 days later, I found the burner phone. It was inside the pocket of the blazer he never wears, the one with satin lining so slippery it feels like holding water. I was lifting it to take to the dry cleaner because women become assistants to the men who promise them protection. The phone was matte gray and lit up with a code that was insultingly obvious, our wedding date. I entered it and found what you'd expect. Messages that began with "miss you" and ended with hotel room numbers. Calendar entries with innocuous titles like supplier meet that mapped perfectly to the ATM withdrawals. But there was one thread that made the floor tilt. It wasn't to a woman. It was to a number labeled Trent. The messages discussed paperwork progress, routing, and the incident. They referenced the judge by first name. They used phrases like optics and narrative and contested asset. My name appeared twice in all caps. Catherine's account. I copied everything. I sent it to my new email, then printed it at the library because the library printer does not remember. I highlighted dates. I made a second copy and put it inside the pages of a cookbook with a sentimental dust jacket. I needed one more thing, the why. Men rarely do this much planning just for kisses and hotel rooms. Men like Michael want 2 things, applause and insurance.
The insurance appeared as a very ordinary envelope in the mail the next morning. It said, "Policy Update." It contained a copy of a life insurance rider with a new beneficiary, the Shell LLC. I stood in the kitchen and felt the room measure me like a box you'd ship something fragile in.
He walked in, kissed my head, and went straight to the sink to wash his hands. "You look pale," he said. "You taking your vitamins?" "Every day," I answered, though the bottle has been empty for a week. He smiled at the window, not at me. "Good girl." I took that phrase and put it in my pocket like a nail. Every story needs a turning point, and mine arrived on a Wednesday with rain stitched into the air so fine you only felt it when it rose off your skin like steam. I waited for Michael to leave, and then I pulled up the section of hallway floor where the board creaks. He had once told Luke that if you're ever going to hide something, hide it where you'd walk over it every day. "You'll notice if it moves," he said. Men love to brag in metaphors. Under the floorboard, I found a small black box, the same matte finish as the recorder, but heavier. Inside, a flash drive, a thick wad of cash, and notarized letters. One was from a neighbor on the next block stating in stiff, tidy cursive that she had witnessed Catherine screaming and throwing objects on multiple occasions. Another was from a friend of his claiming I had volatile mood swings and possible medication misuse. Both letters were dated the same week as my unstable days, the days after the slap. I sat there on the hallway rug with my knees complaining and my hands shaking, and I realized something simple and terrible. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was building me. He was building the version of me he needed a judge to meet. He plugged the flash drive into my laptop. It held audio clips, short ones. Me saying, "I can't do this." Cut right after "can't." Me saying, "Sometimes I want to scream." Cut to sound like a threat. Me dropping a pan with a curse that could be edited into fury. He had been trimming me like a hedge, then collecting the clippings. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because there is a point where fear has to turn into something else, or it eats your bones. I copied the files. I labeled them by date and time, and then I layered them against the recorder under the island, which had captured the full conversations. The contrast was devastating. His edits made me a monster. The truth made him small. I was still fitting the floorboard back into place when the garage door opened. He was home early. I pressed the wood down with my palms and rose with a smile on my face I learned from 1,000 PTA meetings. The door from the garage swung inward. His footsteps were confident thunder. I was 3 seconds from being caught with the floor half open and a pile of his lies cradled in my lap. "Catherine," he called, "you home?" I smoothed my blouse and stepped into the hallway just as he rounded the corner. He looked at my hands first. Men like Michael always measure the little things. Then he looked past me, at the floor. His gaze sharpened. Something, maybe the rug edge, maybe the way the light hit the plank, told him that the house had been listening without him. He smiled slowly. "What are you up to?" I opened my mouth to say, "Just tidying," but the words died in my throat. Because behind him, at the edge of his jacket, something dark and curved peeked out. Something I had never seen him carry in the house before. It wasn't a tool. It was a recorder, exactly like mine,
clipped to his belt and blinking red. The sight of that tiny blinking red light almost stole the air from my lungs. Michael was recording me. Just as I'd hidden my little devices around the house, he had his own. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. If he suspected even a fraction of what I'd uncovered, it could all come crashing down before I was ready. So, I did what I've learned to do best. I smiled. "Tidying," I said lightly, brushing my hands against my skirt like I'd been dusting. He studied me. His eyes flicked from my face down to the rug covering the floorboards I'd just been kneeling over, then back again. His smile was thin, sharp, deliberate. "Always cleaning," he murmured. "That's my Catherine." He walked past, recorder still blinking. My pulse thudded so hard I thought it might pick up on his device. I kept my back straight until I heard the shower turn on upstairs. Then I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, gripping its edge until my knuckles ached. That night, lying beside him, listening to his deep, even breathing, I couldn't close my eyes. My mind kept replaying every sacrifice I'd made for this man, selling my father's cottage, co-signing on his business loans, raising children while he chased deals and disappeared for nights. All the while, I convinced myself he loved me, or at least needed me. But the slap, the draft restraining order, the forged version of me he was building, it all told me the truth. He didn't need me. He needed the destruction of me. The next morning, he was playing the doting husband again. Pancakes, warm syrup, a kiss on my cheek. If I hadn't seen the scarf in his coat pocket, smelled the jasmine perfume clinging to it, I might have been fooled. I ate the pancakes. I smiled. I even laughed at his little jokes. And then while he showered, I slipped into his office. The key I'd had copied weeks ago slid in easily. The drawer opened with a soft scrape. Contracts, invoices, signed checks, business papers, but with amounts and names that didn't make sense. I snapped pictures of everything, my hands trembling with both fear and satisfaction. I didn't need to understand the details. I just needed the paper trail. The more I dug, the more his plan took shape. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't even just about draining accounts. He was laundering, covering tracks, preparing for a life that didn't include me. A life that required my reputation ruined and my name blackened beyond repair. That scarf haunted me. It wasn't mine. It wasn't for me. But instead of confronting him, I folded it neatly back where I found it. I whispered to myself, "Every piece has its place."
I planted another recorder in his truck that afternoon. By evening, I had what I needed. His voice talking to Trent. "She's cracking," Michael said. "One more push and she'll snap. Vargas will sign it without blinking. Then the accounts are mine." The accounts, not just the one he drained. There were more. I listened to those words over and over at the library, headphones clamped tight. My chest ached, but instead of despair, something colder took root. Resolve. He thought he was building a coffin for me, but really, he was nailing it shut on himself. The dinner came 2 nights later. He insisted I attend, which was unusual. Normally, he wanted me far from his business affairs. That alone told me it was a setup. I wore a simple dress, nothing flashy. I pinned a recorder into the lining of my purse. When we arrived at the steakhouse, I realized just how carefully the trap had been laid. The man introduced as his partner was no one I recognized, but sitting across from me, sipping wine with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, was Judge Vargas. Michael leaned back, smug. He said, "Old friend of mine," clapping the judge on the shoulder. Vargas shook my hand warmly. "A pleasure to meet you, Catherine." All through dinner, Michael performed. He spoke about my forgetfulness, how I get worked up over small things. He spun anecdotes that twisted my clumsiness into malice, my exhaustion into instability. Vargas chuckled politely. The partner laughed too loudly. It was theater, and I was cast as the unstable wife. But I didn't take the bait. I didn't argue, didn't flinch. I smiled. I complimented the food. I asked Vargas about his family. And all the while, my purse sat in my lap, quietly recording every word Michael said. When we left, his grip on my elbow was too tight. He whispered, "See, they already believe me." I whispered back, "Good." Because every smug word he uttered was another noose around his neck. By the end of that week, I had a mountain. Receipts, audio clips, suspicious bank documents, the scarf, the life insurance policy, the draft restraining order, even the flash drive from under the floorboard with doctored audio files. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed a stage, a place where masks couldn't survive. That stage presented itself like a gift, our 25th anniversary party. Michael had already invited family, friends, neighbors, business partners, a perfect crowd, a perfect audience. For weeks, I played my part flawlessly. I cooked his meals hot, ironed his shirts crisp, smiled when he kissed my cheek. Meanwhile, in secret, I worked with my lawyer. We synchronized every piece of evidence, tied dates to transactions, lined up recordings next to transcripts. He thought he was orchestrating my downfall, but really he was rehearsing for his own. The night of the party, I stood in front of the mirror, fastening a necklace that once belonged to my mother. My hands were steady. My heart beat strong. I wasn't walking into a celebration. I was walking into war, and I was going to win. The next morning, I slipped into his truck while he showered. The recorder I had hidden there held new treasures, conversations between him and Trent. This time, the words were sharper, more explicit. "She's softening up," Michael said. "Another week and she'll break. If the meds don't push her over, the scene at the party will. Once Vargas sees her crack in front of everyone, it's done." Trent's voice. "And the accounts?" Michael. "All ready. Once the order's in place, I transfer everything. She won't even see it happen." I played the clip 3 times, the bile rising higher each time. My hands shook as I forwarded it to my lawyer's secure inbox. But just when I thought I'd cornered him, another twist surfaced. A letter arrived in the mail, addressed to me, but clearly intended to unsettle. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of my search history from the library. Queries like, how to prove fraud, evidence admissible in court, how to expose adultery. Every line highlighted. At the bottom, in Michael's handwriting, "Careful, Catherine, looks like obsession." He had someone watching me, either Trent or another accomplice. My sanctuary, the library, was compromised. For one wild moment, panic gnawed at me. What if every step I'd taken was already known? What if he was always 2 moves ahead? Then I remembered the flash drive, the doctored clips, the scarf, the insurance writer, the pills. No, he wasn't ahead. He was desperate, and desperate men get sloppy. The next day, I staged my own performance. I made sure he saw me leave the house with grocery bags, like I was off to the market. Instead, I drove to Hannah's place. Hannah thought I was visiting for coffee, but in truth, I planted a second cache of evidence there. If Michael ever ransacked the house, and I was certain he wouldn't find my backups. That night, Michael cornered me in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, recorder blinking. He said, "People are saying you've seemed unstable. Even Brianna asked if you were all right." The mention of my daughter's name was a knife. He was pulling the children into this, poisoning them against me. I didn't rise to it. I smiled. "I'm perfectly fine, Michael. Thank you for your concern." His eyes narrowed. He wanted me to snap. Instead, I left him, standing there, recorder still hungry for a confession that wouldn't come. By then, the suspense was suffocating. 2 weeks until the party. 2 weeks until the reckoning. And then, the mid-story twist landed like a hammer. I received a call from my lawyer. She sounded grimmer than I'd ever heard her. "Catherine, I pulled some strings at the courthouse. You need to sit down." I gripped the phone, already bracing. "What is it?" She said, "Michael has already filed the restraining order." I blinked. "What?" "It's filed, signed, and scheduled for a hearing the day after your anniversary party. He wasn't waiting. He was accelerating." The room tilted. For a moment, it felt like I was losing ground. All my careful planning, all my evidence gathering, he was already moving the pieces faster than I realized. But my lawyer wasn't finished. Her voice hardened like steel. "The good news? He filed too soon. We can use that against him. If you're ready to go public at the party, we can make sure his lies collapse before the hearing." I hung up, trembling. Michael thought he was ahead, but his impatience was a gift. Filing early meant I could expose him before the judge ever heard his version. From that moment, the party wasn't just an opportunity. It was my battlefield. And I was going to make sure the whole world watched him burn. 2 weeks shrank into days, then into hours, each one a wire pulled tighter across my chest. Michael thought he had timed everything perfectly, but the irony was that his impatience had opened a door I hadn't expected. Filing that restraining order early gave me a weapon I hadn't planned for: urgency. I spent those days crafting my mask so carefully it could have won an award. I played the role of the devoted wife, the gracious hostess-to-be. I ironed his shirts, packed lunch for him, even let him kiss my cheek while he whistled like a man who had already won. But inside, my mind was a storm. Every plan, every piece of evidence, every risk calibrated like a chessboard where one wrong move could end me. The escalation began small, like tiny cuts. He left brochures on therapist offices scattered around the house. "Just a suggestion," he said with a smile. "Everyone could use some help." His voice recorder blinked at his hip. Then it grew bolder. A neighbor stopped me while I was clipping roses. She said, "Michael mentioned you'd been under a lot of stress," she said gently, as if approaching a wounded bird. The humiliation burned harder than the summer sun. He was painting me unstable not just in court documents, but in the court of public opinion. I doubled down. My replies were measured, my tone calm, my actions deliberate. Every smile I gave him, every "thank you, dear," was another stitch in the net I was weaving. But then the financial threats surfaced. A letter from the bank arrived, overdue notices on accounts I had never touched, my signature forged across the bottom. Debts in my name tied to shell companies I'd never heard of. If Michael succeeded, I wouldn't just lose my marriage, I'd be buried in debts that weren't mine. I photocopied everything, slid copies into manila folders, and sent them straight to my lawyer. She called me that night, her voice clipped. "Catherine, he's not just trying to destroy your reputation, he's setting you up for financial ruin." "I know," I whispered.
That's why the party matters more than ever. Because once I exposed him, once his lies were shredded in front of witnesses, his financial web would unravel too. But Michael wasn't finished tightening the screws. 3 days before the party, Brianna called. "Mom, are you okay?" Her voice was hesitant, heavy.
Yes, sweetheart. Why? Dad, he said you've been different, that you're paranoid, that you've been yelling a lot. My throat closed. He was turning my children against me. My daughter, my pride, my heart was now being handed a version of me I didn't recognize. I swallowed the hurt and said softly, "Brianna, I'm fine. I promise you I'm fine. Just come to the party. You'll see." When I hung up, I sat on the kitchen floor and let the tears come. But only for a moment. Then I wiped them away and returned to work. The escalation ladder was almost complete. Lies, neighbors, children, finances. The only thing left was public risk, and Michael delivered that too. 2 nights before the party, he came home with wine. He poured me a glass, smiling like we were college sweethearts again. I pretended to sip, excused myself, and poured it down the sink. Later, I dipped a cotton swab into the residue at the bottom. A faint chemical smell lingered, sharp and wrong. He wasn't just trying to paint me unstable anymore. He was setting up an accident. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of every possible outcome. If I failed, I would lose everything. My freedom, my children, my dignity. But if I succeeded, Michael would burn in the flames he'd lit for me. The day before the party, I rehearsed. Not words, those would come naturally. I rehearsed calm. I rehearsed stillness. I rehearsed how to hold the evidence, how to reveal it piece by piece so no one could deny it. The party was more than an anniversary. It was my battlefield, and I was going to fight with proof. The party was dressed in silver and lies. Balloons hovered against the ceiling, candles lined the mantel, and a banner stretched across the living room, 25 years strong. I moved through the crowd with a practiced smile, tray in hand, the perfect hostess. My children lingered near the punch bowl, uncertain. My neighbors buzzed about the food, and Michael floated like a king among subjects. He had no idea what was about to happen. At 6:30, he tapped a glass with his fork. "To my wife," he boomed, arm curling around my waist. "For 25 years she has been the anchor of this home, the love of my life, the reason I keep striving. Raise your glasses." Applause rattled the chandelier. He kissed my cheek like a man who owned me. Then he leaned close, breath hot in my ear. "Your turn, darling. Try not to embarrass yourself." I stepped forward, my heart steady as a drum. I am grateful for the years we've shared. But tonight, I don't just want to celebrate years. I want to celebrate truth. The room shifted. A murmur rippled through the guests. Michael's smile tightened, but he held it. I reached for the small speaker hidden behind the cake stand. One button press, and the room filled with Michael's voice, thin and sharp. "She's cracking. One more push, and she'll snap. Vargas will sign it without blinking. Then the accounts are mine." The air went brittle. "That's a joke," Michael barked, half high and false. "Out of context." Context matters. I signaled Luke, who dimmed the lights. A projector blinked to life, filling the wall with 2 audio waveforms. Top file, edited.
I pressed play, my voice clipped and jagged. I can't. Silence. Bottom file, full recording. My voice continued. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when you keep moving the goalposts. Michael's voice followed, smug. Maybe you're just not cut out for this. Maybe you need help. Gasps echoed like gunfire. People shifted, eyes darting. His proof was exposed as fabrication. I laid more evidence on the buffet, like cards in a final hand. The forged bank loan, the false prescription bottle with my name, the draft restraining order full of lies. Murmurs swelled into outrage. Then came the twist. The screen flickered again, this time to grainy video from my hidden camera in the kitchen. Michael stood at the counter, humming, tipping white powder into my coffee mug, rinsing the spoon, setting the cup where I would find it. Silence. A silence so sharp it seemed to hum. It wasn't sugar, I said quietly. It was hydroxyzine, a sedative, tested by a lab. Michael's mask cracked. He lunged forward, but Warren blocked him. Don't, Warren warned under his breath. Supplements! Magnesium! She's unstable! No, I cut in. You are. The crowd had stopped looking at me. All eyes were on him now. The liar, the abuser, the man unraveling in his own trap. Brianna's face crumpled, tears brimming. Luke stood rigid, fists balled, shame painted across him. Neighbors whispered, "Oh my God, she was telling the truth. Unbelievable." I turned back to Michael, calm as stone. You built a version of me that doesn't exist. You told stories. Tonight, I told the truth, and everyone here heard it. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. I stacked the papers neatly, shut off the projector, and straightened. Enjoy the food, I told the room. We'll cut the cake in a moment. It was done. The exposure complete. The mask ripped away. Michael stood small in the center of our living room, sweat shining at his hairline, lips trembling around words that wouldn't come. The man who had rehearsed my downfall was now watching his own. And I hadn't even raised my voice. I didn't sleep the night after the party, not because I was afraid. Fear had burned off like fog under noon sun, but because my mind wouldn't stop cataloging the edges, the faces when the audio played, the slack in Michael's knees, the way Brianna gripped my hand like a rope thrown to a drowning swimmer. Morning made everything ordinary again. Birds, a trash truck, the smell of coffee I didn't drink. Ordinary, except for the envelope slid under the door. Michael's handwriting, a single sentence. If you keep this up, you'll regret it.
I snapped a photo, slid the note into a page protector, and added it to the stack. Consequences have a quiet shape when you're ready for them. Court was set for Tuesday at 9 a.m. Hearing on his restraining order. The same order he filed too early, the one he thought would cage me. I wore a navy dress and low heels that didn't click. I braided my hair back like a woman who expects to be believed. My lawyer, velvet glove, blowtorch heart, met me on the steps with a paper cup of water and a nod that said, "We're on the right road." Inside, fluorescent lighting flattened everyone. Michael sat at the petitioner's table in a pale blue tie that made him look softer than he is. Trent skulked in the second row, pretending to read his phone. Alana sat near the aisle, spine straight. Brianna and Luke flanked me like bookends, silent and present.
Judge Vargas entered with the calm of a man accustomed to rooms standing for him. He glanced at the docket, at Michael, at me. For a heartbeat, I felt the old dread that men like him and men like Michael speak a language I'll never learn. Then my lawyer rose, and the dread evaporated. "Your Honor," she said, voice smooth as a canal with a current beneath. "We intend to show that this petition is not merely unfounded, but part of a broader pattern of coercive control, evidence manipulation, and financial fraud. Before testimony, we move to admit exhibits A through Q under judicial notice and as business records and party admissions." Michael's lawyer, new to me, hair perfect, eyes hungry, half rose. "Objection to the scope." "Overruled," Vargas said, a touch too fast. "We'll hear argument." We didn't argue like TV. There were no speeches that end in applause. There were dates, receipts, transcripts, chain of custody affidavits. There was the audio from the truck, authenticated by the device vendor's custodian of records. There were the bank statements with forged signatures and the handwriting expert's preliminary letter. There was the lab analysis of the powder from my cup, chain logged, sealed, opened, tested, resealed. When the poisoning report appeared on the screen, the courtroom quieted in a way that made the air heavy. Michael stared at the table as if it would volunteer a tunnel. Then came the call no one expected, except my lawyer. She had subpoenaed the clerk from the mailbox store. He took the stand with ink still smudged on his fingers. He testified that Mr. Howard paid cash to set up a scan and forward for envelopes addressed to me, sent to an email he provided, labeled "for her records." When asked if I ever authorized it, he shook his head. "No, ma'am, the lady never came in." Michael's lawyer objected to relevance. Overruled. Then my lawyer called Alana. The room adjusted, like it does when the narrative asks for empathy and doubt at the same time. Alana did not look at me. She looked at the judge, at the seal on the wall, at the place where justice is supposed to live. She spoke quietly. She confirmed the affair. She confirmed the threats. She produced her own recordings, Michael promising to file things if she embarrassed him. Michael instructing her to hold for him at the studio under a mat. Michael practicing lines for concerned husband the night before our dinner with Vargas. Michael's lawyer objected to character evidence. My lawyer countered with intent and motive. Overruled. When the audio dinner played, Michael's voice dropping soft and performative about my forgetfulness, Vargas shifted in his chair. It was small, but small things tell on us. Then my lawyer did something that made the room lean forward. She didn't call me. She called the court's technology administrator, a man in a short-sleeved shirt and a tie with spaceships. He testified that a complaint had been logged the previous week, an anonymized email alleging improper ex parte contact between a petitioner and a judicial officer at an outside event. He was not here to prove the allegation. He was here to prove the email existed, the timestamp, the attachment, a photo of a dinner at a steakhouse, 3 men at a table, one of them the judge. Your Honor, my lawyer said, not kindly. We are not alleging impropriety. We are demonstrating petitioner's attempt to engineer optics. Vargas's jaw moved like he was chewing ice. He cleared his throat and said, "The court is satisfied that the record speaks for itself. Counsel, proceed." But the room had already heard the subtext. Careful with your footing. Finally, my lawyer called me. I took the stand and told the plain truth in short, square sentences. The slap, the draft petition, the doctored audio, the pills in my coffee. I did not perform. I did not cry. I did not call names. I described actions and dates and what my face felt like under a bag of frozen peas. Michael's lawyer cross-examined me with a smile that has made other women shrink. I didn't. When he asked if I often felt overwhelmed, I said yes when my husband was poisoning me. When he asked if I edited any audio, I said no. He did. I brought both versions. When he asked if I hated my husband, I said, I don't know what to call the feeling you have for someone who tries to erase you. Hate seems too easy. He ran out of sharp edges. That happens when you give men like that only the truth to step on. We broke for 10 minutes. In the hallway, Brianna put her head on my shoulder for exactly 3 breaths, and then let go, like strength handed back. Luke stared at a spot on the carpet until he said, Mom, I'm sorry I didn't see. I told him, seeing is work. He nodded like a man who had just gotten his first real job.
Back in session, Vargas ruled. He denied Michael's petition with prejudice, legal words that mean, don't bring me this again. He granted a temporary protective order in my favor, no contact except through counsel, stay-away boundaries for home and work. He referred the matter of the alleged poisoning to the district attorney. He ordered a forensic accounting on the business entities involved in the transfers, and then, this was the sound of a gavel finding bone, he recused himself from any future civil matters involving these parties, citing the appearance of partiality, however unfounded. That was the late twist. The judge stepping off the board. Not because he confessed, but because sunlight makes even honest men blink. Michael didn't look back at me when he left. He walked like a man who had learned what gravity feels like. Trent vanished as if swallowed by a door. Alana sat very still until the room emptied and then exhaled a breath that sounded like something she had been holding for months. After, the black and white happened fast. A detective calling to arrange a statement, my bank flagging attempted transfers and freezing accounts. 2 of Michael's partners sending polite emails with phrases like distancing and fiduciary review. The life insurance carrier called about an inquiry. Our pastor texted something neutral and kind. 3 neighbors left pies on my porch like offerings to a storm that had passed. Justice isn't clean. It doesn't wash the floor and leave lemons behind. It leaves paperwork, plastic bracelets, and a calendar full of follow-ups. It leaves you staring at your own hands and asking, what do I do with them now that they're empty of defense? What I did was small and enormous. I changed the locks. I opened windows. I vacuumed under the couch where pennies go to become dust. I made a pot of soup and ate it hot. Brianna came over that night with garlic bread and a guilty smile. She said you were brave. I shook my head. I was prepared. She nodded. Maybe that's what bravery really looks like. Luke fixed the loose hinge on the laundry door. He asked if I was keeping the house. I said, for now. It's mine as much as any place I've cleaned for 25 years. We talked about the future like it was a room we hadn't furnished yet. Sell the house later maybe, rebuild credit, therapy, a trip to the coast and a cheap motel with a clean pool where I could learn what silence sounds like without fear in it. The messages poured in after the party video leaked in pieces. Women I knew by face but not story wrote to say thank you, and me too, and I didn't keep the audio. Men wrote to say I'm sorry, and a few wrote to say worse. I didn't answer the worst ones. I kept the apologies like seeds. Maybe something grows. Maybe not. The district attorney called to say the lab results met the threshold for a criminal case. I nodded into the phone as if I could nod toward justice. I don't know what a jury will do. I don't control that room. I don't need to. I already saved myself in the rooms I could reach. When I finally slept, I dreamed of the cottage I sold to build his business. In the dream, the cottage wasn't a loss. It was a lesson. I woke without sadness. Regret and grief are different.
Regret is about what you did. Grief is about what you loved. I can live with grief. What did I learn? That love without truth is a stage set, pretty and hollow. That control dressed as concern is still control. That evidence is a kind of mercy. It keeps you from gaslighting yourself. That you cannot out-argue a lie in a room built for performance. You have to change the room. I didn't win because I shouted louder. I won because I prepared longer, because I placed facts where feelings wanted to go, because I let the light in and didn't apologize when it hurt someone's eyes. One afternoon, weeks later, I saw Michael across a parking lot, thinner, older. He looked at me like a man seeing a house he used to live in and no longer owns. He lifted a hand, not to wave, but to measure the distance. I didn't measure back. I got in my car and drove toward a future that would not require me to rehearse my sanity. At home, I set the table for one, then changed my mind and set it for two. Brianna texted she was on her way with a new recipe. Luke said he'd stop by to taste and judge. I laughed out loud in an empty kitchen, and it wasn't the sound of someone keeping herself together. It was the sound of someone already together. I ladled soup, hot as summer asphalt. I stood in my own light. I tasted and didn't flinch. The moral? Don't let anyone else narrate you. Keep your receipts. Believe what the facts say, not what the performance begs you to feel. And if someone tries to turn you into a story that serves them, write a better one with witnesses. The aftermath isn't a bow, it's a door. I opened it. I walked through. And for the first time in years, I did not look back to check if I was allowed. Life has a strange quiet after the storm. People think the aftermath is noise, court dates, headlines, police reports, and yes, those come. But what lingers most is silence, the kind you hear in your own house when the door finally locks behind you and you realize no one is listening for a mistake to pounce on. I remember sitting on the porch one evening, tea steaming between my palms, watching the sky turn that lavender blue it only does in summer. For the first time in years, I didn't brace myself for headlights sweeping into the driveway. I didn't check my reflection for bruises. I didn't feel like a character in someone else's play. The neighbors waved, careful, but kind. Some of them had pieced together the story from what leaked online. Others knew only the whispers. None of them looked at me with pity. That was a gift. Pity makes you smaller. Truth, even messy truth, makes you stand taller. I rebuilt in tiny ways, replaced curtains with lighter ones, painted the kitchen pale green, covering over years of steam and shadow. The house felt like mine for the first time since we'd signed a mortgage.
My children came back to me in their own rhythms. Brianna with her gentle questions. Mom, how are you really? Luke with his actions, mowing the lawn without being asked, fixing a leaky faucet. Both of them learning that love isn't just words, it's presence. As for Michael, the man who tried to erase me, his name still floats through town like smoke. Some call him foolish, some call him cruel, some refuse to call him at all. He faces his own consequences now, legal and financial. But he is no longer my story to tell. My story is this. I survived. I gathered proof when proof was all I had. I spoke the truth when silence was the safer option. And I showed my children that dignity isn't about staying quiet. It's about standing steady when the room wants you to bow. People often ask me what moment felt like victory. Was it the party when his mask slipped, the courtroom when the judge recused himself, the call from the bank freezing his transfers? The truth? None of those. It was standing at my stove one evening, tasting soup hot from the pot, and realizing it no longer carried the memory of a slap. It was just soup. Just mine. That was the real revenge. Taking back the ordinary, unremarkable things and making them safe again. Now, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet, endured, waited for an easier way out? Or would you have gathered proof, piece by piece, even when it felt like carrying a mountain? And tell me, too, where are you listening from? I have told you my story here in the United States, but I know these words travel far. Are you in a small town like mine? Or a city that never sleeps? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know how far the truth reaches. This story isn't just about me. It's about anyone who has ever been told they're unstable when they're really just unprotected. Anyone who has been forced to rehearse their sanity for an audience that thrives on doubt. Anyone who has felt themselves being written into a role that doesn't belong to them. If that's you, hear this. You are not crazy. You are not alone. You are not a character in someone else's false play. Gather your receipts, find your light, and don't be afraid to change the room where the story is told. I don't know what comes next in full. Healing isn't a straight road. It's a patchwork, stitched together with therapy sessions, late-night calls from friends, fresh coats of paint, and laughter that feels clumsy at first. But I know this. I'm walking forward, not back, and each step feels like reclaiming ground I didn't realize I'd lost. So thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me share the mess, the fear, the strength, the revenge, and the healing. Stories like this aren't easy to tell, but they matter. They remind us that silence only serves the liar, and light only serves the truth. And if you've stayed with me to the end, do me a favor. Answer those questions below. What would you have done in my shoes? And where are you listening from? Because the comment section isn't just chatter. It's a room where other people can find proof they're not alone. The house is quieter now. Not the tense silence of waiting for footsteps, but the soft kind, like a deep breath finally exhaled. Some nights I sit by the window with tea, listening to crickets, and I marvel at how ordinary peace can feel once you've fought tooth and nail for it. People ask me if I regret anything, if I regret staying as long as I did, if I regret giving Michael years he didn't deserve. But regret only lives in the past, and I don't want to live there anymore. I live here, in the present, where my locks are changed, my name is clear, and my story belongs to me. I won't pretend it's all easy. Healing is work. Trust is slow. But when I look in the mirror now, I don't see the woman Michael tried to paint, a fragile, unstable shadow. I see Catherine, stronger, steadier, a woman who refused to be erased. And that is the real revenge. Because revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about survival, proof, and reclaiming the life someone else thought they could rewrite. I told the truth, and the truth stood taller than all his lies. So if you're listening to me now, wherever you are, remember this. Don't let anyone else narrate you. Hold on to your receipts. Protect your story. And when the time comes, don't be afraid to tell it loud enough that no one can mistake who you really are. Did you like my story? What would you have done in my place? And which city are you listening from? Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more stories.